Hello and welcome to the world of literature. I am your host with the series 100 FN. In this series, we have been dealing with 100 most famous novels from English literature. And in the recent videos, we have been dealing with the novels of Thomas Hardy. In this lecture, we would also be dealing with one of the famous novels by Thomas Hardy. Now, in the beginning of the lecture, we reveal some significant facts and figures about the novel, and we call that section as clues. Now, the clues would be on your screen shortly, and we hope that you will guess the novel that we are taking up for the day. The novel is influenced by the world of ballads. The title of the novel is taken from Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. The novel was listed at number 48 on the BBC's survey of Big Read in 2003. The book finished 100th at the Guardian's list of the greatest love stories of all time in 2007. These were the clues about the novel, and I hope you have rightly guessed that at the world of literature today we would be dealing with Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Now, before we come up to the plot of the novel Far from the Madding Crowd, let's have a look at the characters with whom we would be dealing in the course of the story. So the characters from the story are Gabriel Oak. He would be the protagonist of the story. He is a shepherd. Bathsheba Everdeen, she is the lead female in the novel. She is described as a young, beautiful lady without fortune. We have Sergeant Frank Troy. He is described as a young husband, handsome man, and also would be playing the role of an antagonist in the novel. We have Mr. Boldwood. He is described as a farm owner, and he is the first suitor of Bathsheba. These were the characters from the novel Far from the Maddening Crowd. Now up next we would be taking up the plot of the novel Far from the Maddening Crowd. Now coming to the plot of the novel Far from the Maddening Crowd, as the story begins, we are introduced to Bathsheba Everdeen, and she is described as a beautiful young woman, but without fortune. Now, one thing that is important at this point to reveal is that the novel is set in Wessex, as are most of the novels of Thomas Hardy, and the setting of the novel is rustic, as was the case with two Victorian novelists, George Eliot and Thomas Hardy. Most of their novels were set in the countryside, dealing with the people of lower class. Either they would be shepherds or they would be farmers. They would not be well read or well educated. That was because both Thomas Hardy and George Eliot had an influence of the lyrical ballads by William Wordsworth. Now, after introducing to the lead female of the story, we are introduced to the protagonist of the novel, Gabriel Oak. Bathsheba Everdeen, she comes across Gabriel Oak, who is described as a young farmer, and Bathsheba even saves the life of Gabriel Oak one evening. Now, as they get along together, in fact, Gabriel, he falls in love with Bathsheba, and one day he would ask her to marry him. But she refuses. And the reason that she gives for her refusal is that she does not love Gabriel. Now, after the refusal of Bathsheba, Gabriel is disheartened. And later, we come to know that even Bathsheba, he leaves to Witherbury, which is described as a town a few miles away where they were presently living. And after this point, the focus would be on the story of Gabriel Oak, what happens to Gabriel Oak in the absence of Bathsheba Everdeen. Now we are told that due to a sheepdog, Gabriel loses all his folk and becomes bankrupt. Now, when we were introduced to both these characters initially, Bathsheba was described as a beautiful lady without fortunes, but that was not the case with Gabriel Oak. Gabriel Oak had some fortunes, like he wasn't the richest of the men, but he had a flock of sheep, and since he was a shepherd, but unfortunately, at this point, he loses all his sheep and he becomes bankrupt. Now, after becoming bankrupt, he leaves Shalford in search of a job. Now, he's searching for a job because he is no more a shepherd. He doesn't have sheep to look after. And at this point, there is a pause in the story of Gabriel Oak, and the writer, the narrator, shifts and says few things about what is going on in the life of Bathsheba Everdeen. Now, in the life of Bathsheba Everdeen, she has inherited her uncle's prosperous farms in the town of Witherbury and has eventually become rich. Now, in the very beginning of the story, we find a complete reversal of fortunes in context of the two leading characters, that is Gabriel Oak and Bathsheba Everdeen. Gabriel Oak, who initially was rich or had good fortunes, had eventually turned out to be bankrupt, and Bathsheba, who initially wasn't having enough fortunes, has now become rich after inheriting her uncle's farm. Now, on his way to Witherbury, Gabriel rescues a local farm from fire, and he goes to the mistress of this farm and he asks her if she needs a shepherd, since we know Gabriel is in search of a job. And it is revealed that the farm which was on fire was actually the farm of Bathsheba, and Bathsheba would hire him. And now this is the second encounter between Gabriel Oak and Bathsheba in the story. They were initially together, but after Gabriel had proposed her, she had left to Witherbury, and now this is the second encounter, and she would again hire Gabriel Oak, but this time as a shepherd, as an employee. Now, as Bathsheba learns to manage the farm, she becomes acquainted with one of her neighbors, Mr. Boldwood, and one day, as a jest on a Valentine's Day, she would send him a letter with the words, "Marry me." Now, Boldwood, after reading these letters, becomes obsessed with her, because remember, we were introduced that she is a very young, beautiful lady. Initially, she had no fortunes, but now she has fortunes also, and he becomes her suitor. Now, Gabriel does not like this nonsensical act of Bathsheba, and he rebukes her for her senselessness, but in return, Bathsheba fires Gabriel Oak from the job. Having fired Gabriel Oak, Bathsheba's folk dies of a bloat. Now, since she was having enough sheep right now, and Gabriel was actually looking after her sheep, but since Gabriel has left and Bathsheba is in trouble again, and we are told that it is only Gabriel Oak who actually knows the cure of this disease which the folk of Bathsheba has caught. But Bathsheba is, having that problem of ego, that she cannot go and ask Gabriel for help. But when she has got no option left and most of sheep start dying, she finally asks Gabriel for help and finally befriends him. Now we are having here the story of Bathsheba and Gabriel going hand in hand. They are having troubles right from the word go. They separate and they get united time and again. And now again they have befriended. In the meantime, there is another twist in the story of Bathsheba. Initially, we knew that she had, proposed Mr. Boldwood, but now she would come across a handsome soldier, Sergeant Troy, and Troy falls in love with Bathsheba. Now, this enrages Boldwood because previously Bathsheba had proposed Boldwood on a Valentine's Day, and Bathsheba decides to marry Frank. Now, despite Gabriel's warning, now Gabriel would be warning every time Bathsheba takes any silly step. He warned her when she proposed in a jest Mr. Boldwood, and now she is leaving Boldwood and deciding to marry Frank Torrey. Gabriel would come with a warning. Frank Troy is described as a cheat, and we are told that he has recently impregnated a local girl, Fanny Robin, and he almost married her, but though they are not married. Now, Bathsheba later in the story would travel to Bath in order to warn Tori of Boldwood's anger, because Boldwood has become angry, and while she is there, Frank Troy convinces her to marry him. Gabriel, on the other hand, has remained her friend throughout and does not approve of the marriage. Now, after they are married, a few weeks after their marriage to Bathsheba, Frank Troy sees Fanny Robin, whom he had actually impregnated by Bathsheba, has got no clue of this story. Now she is poor and sick. And later, Fanny dies while giving birth to her child, and even her child would die. And Bathsheba discovers that Frank Troy is the father of actually this newly born baby. Grief-stricken at Fanny's death and riddled with the shame, Frank Troy runs away and is thought to have been drowned. Now, this is another development in the plot, that Frank is supposed to be dead. Now, with Frank Troy supposedly dead, Mr. Boldwood becomes more and more emphatic about Bathsheba marrying him. Now, he's back in the story and he would propose a second time Bathsheba. And as the plot grows, Gabriel Oak is still out of the story, and Bathsheba agrees to marry Boldwood. Now, Tori sees that he sees Bathsheba at a fair and decides to return. Now, here it is rather revealed that Frank is actually alive. He was supposed to be dead, but here Boldwood, he holds a Christmas party, and there he invites Bathsheba and again proposes her for marriage. But just after she has agreed, Frank Troy arrives to claim her. Now, there are so many developments in the plot that are going in this complicated plot of Far From the Maddening Crowd. Now, again, we have Frank back in the story and he has returned to claim. Now, Bathsheba screams and Boldwood shoots Frank Troy dead. Now, first character to be eliminated is the Frank. He is killed by Boldwood. Now, after this incident, after killing Frank Troy, Boldwood is imprisoned for life. And then there is a gap of almost a few months later. Bathsheba would eventually marry Gabriel. But before marrying Gabriel, Gabriel is leaving the form of Bathsheba, and Bathsheba would go to the Gabriel's hut and ask him that, why are you leaving me? And Gabriel says, that the people are talking about us. We are not having anything because I am not married to you. You are not going to marry me, because that is what was in the mind of the Gabriel, that she has already married 2 men and I am nowhere in the story. But eventually, Bathsheba would ask him for marriage and they would get married, and we are told that after their marriage they live a prosperous life. Now, that was all about the plot of Far From the Maddening Crowd. So that was all about the plot of the novel. Now, after discussing the plot of the novel, up next, we will be having a review of the story. If, for example, you skip the story or you weren't able to remember everything, every minor development of the plot, for that, at the World of Literature, we have a section wherein we review the story. So let's have the review of the story. On your screen is the review of the story. Now, Bathsheba Avadi, a beautiful young woman, is introduced first up, but we are told that she is without a fortune. She comes across Gabriel Oak, who is a young farmer, and saves his life one evening. Now, Bathsheba saves his life one evening. Gabriel falls in love with her and asks her to marry him, but she refuses because she does not love him. Now, after the refusal of Bathsheba, Gabriel, he is disheartened, and rather here Bathsheba would be moving away to Weatherbury. Now, due to a sheepdog, Gabriel loses all his folk and becomes bankrupt. Gabriel leaves Shortsford in search of a job. On the other hand, upon inheriting her uncle's prosperous farm, Bathsheba has moved to Witherbury and become rich. Gabriel is also heading to Witherbury and comes across a burning farm. It is Bathsheba's farm which is on fire, and here Bathsheba would hire Gabriel. Now she becomes acquainted with her neighbor Boldwood, and on a Valentine's Day she proposes Boldwood in a jest by writing, "Marry me." Gabriel rebukes her for her silliness, but she fires him. Bathsheba's folk die of bloat. Cure is known only by Gabriel, but she can't ask him for help. Eventually, she gives up the differences and seeks Gabriel's help. Bathsheba meets Frank Troy and gets attracted to him, and this enrages Boldwood. Bathsheba decides to marry Frank despite Gabriel's warnings. Frank turns out to be a cheat. Bathsheba travels to Bath to warn Frank about Boldwood's anger. Bathsheba and Frank are married. After marriage, Bathsheba sees Fanny, who has been impregnated by Frank. She dies in childbirth. Grief-stricken at Fanny's death, Frank runs away and is thought to be dead. Boldwood becomes interested in Bathsheba again after the death of Frank. Bathsheba agrees to marry Boldwood. Now it is revealed that Frank is alive. In a Christmas party, Boldwood proposes Bathsheba again, and Frank enters to claim Bathsheba. Bathsheba screams, and Boldwood shoots Frank Troy dead. A few months later, Bathsheba would marry Gabriel and live a prosperous life. Boldwood, on the other hand, would be imprisoned for life. That was the review of the story Far from the Maddening Crowd, a review of the novel Far from the Maddening Crowd. And next, or in the last section, we would be dealing with the ending of the novel. How does the novel look like at the end? So, at the end of the story, Frank Troy is shot dead by Boldwood. Boldwood is imprisoned for the lifetime for killing Frank. And eventually, Bathsheba marries Gabriel Oak. So that is all from the today's lecture at 100 FM. We dealt with Thomas Hardy's novel Far from the Maddening Crowd, and I hope that the information about the novel was valuable. You liked the lecture, and don't forget to share, subscribe and like our channel. And for more interesting videos and more important videos, you keep watching The World of Literature.